lot of mentions today about this sense of belonging. I think everyone mentioned it. Metka, you mentioned it with the branding and using branding to create a sense of belonging. And Lego, we had the social and the play. I think Mark mentioned it as a common driver. And so, I mean, do any of you want to elaborate on that? That's kind of what I've gone away with. Quite critical to workplace is creating a sense of belonging. So anyone want to elaborate?
Yeah, so is it on? Yep. Yeah. I mentioned a researcher we work with, Dr. Paul Zak, and he says that we are neurologically wired to belong. But the thing he talks about as well is you can belong on the edge and you can belong right in the center. It doesn't mean, and we've looked at this with Nigel with extroverts and introverts, that actually sometimes it's this thing about don't stop inviting introverts who don't come to the parties. They still want to feel like they belong. But this whole thing that we are neurologically wired to belong, and that I think is so important, and getting a sense of whether you feel you belong, you can almost tell quite early on. You know, I took a job for money. Within a week, I knew this wasn't my company. I didn't belong. It wasn't my tribe, I think someone used earlier. So there's just a lot of research. Baumeister and Leary I've quoted, Dr. Paul Zak. There's so much stuff out there on belonging. And also the other side of belonging is loneliness. Yeah. And you've worked with the Loneliness Lab about the whole subject. That's the challenge, is if you don't belong, often you've got this huge tragedy in some areas of loneliness.
Well, not as you might expect. If there's no sense of belonging, more feelings of loneliness, there's higher attrition rates. People are more likely to leave the organisation. And okay, that's bad for them, but it's also a costly experience. Yeah, I think Jesper wanted to come in first.
Yeah, so I just want to contribute to one thing. Belonging is really a good business case. You know, just picture the opposite. Belonging means, you know, it's part of a culture. You know the quote, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So, you know, that means people go the extra mile. You just mentioned yourself, if they're not belonging, cost of recruiting new people, onboarding, when they're into speed, you know, and up and running, where they're really contributing. Belonging, probably, if you can create the sense of belonging, that's probably the cheapest dopamine you can give people, so they would work for you and work harder and everything. So, you know, being the accountant in the room, I would create belonging everywhere. Because then people stay, they work harder, they create creative. I think humans are pretty easy to trigger, and we're pretty easy to cheat. So that's why belonging is something everyone should have on their corporate agenda, how to create belonging and purpose and everything. Yeah. Sorry being so, you know, direct, but I think if you want, I would even say if you want to survive in an increased competition, you need to do belonging. And we're all fighting for the workforce. Look at all over, you know, EU and also in the UK. Sorry to mention that. I had to. Everyone is fighting for talent. There's scarcity of workforce. The birth rates are down all over. We will fight for that workforce. Belonging becomes an essential part.
Yeah. Did you want to add to that, Metka? Because you use branding, haven't you, to create that?
I mean, sure, of course, it's belonging, definitely. I mean, this is what we are speaking about in building a fan club, which is not a formal version of a club, of course, but really we're actually playing around, and also in our events, especially for the kids, and also our, for example, people that retire also get presents, which are puzzles. So being each and every one employee is part of a puzzle. For example, when our former HR director retired, we even signed the puzzles each and every employee that she was in the company for more than 40 years, which meant she actually took everyone that is here still, it was her job. I mean, she employed them actually. So yes, that's this deeper sense, but for me, also as a brand strategist, it's on the one side, of course, the employees that are building the brand. We spend most of the time on a job, on a site. So yeah, it needs to be something where we feel as good as possible. But then on the other hand, also to bring a brand in our minds, or brand as an essential part of the world we are living in. So we are not ashamed of what we are working for. So also the brand being a good citizenship, citizen of the globe, for example, and that's something that is also very important from my perspective.
But brand. I worked with a brewery for a while, and they thought the brand was the logo, and I was like, no,
that's
the brand,
a trademark.
Yeah,
Logo is actually a trademark. You know,
yeah.
it's different.
So it's part of your brand is creating that loyalty and that sense of belonging, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there are, of course, different views on brand. I just use it because it's a simple management tool, actually, that is 360 degrees around us. Everything we do, you know, how we pick up the phone or how our secretary picks up the phone is actually the feeling, the expectations. The expectation of a brand that we are building, that's why we are all so important. That's why we are just all part of the puzzle.
Yeah.
Wherever we go, whoever we send out, whoever is speaking in the SIP name. So, yeah, we need to be proud of that. And I mean, if we as employees are not proud of what we're working for, how can we expect then the markets to trust us, to feel fine with our brand, to buy? I mean, and also, yes, of course, at home, when we come home and then we say, oh, again, this company. I mean,
people talk to their friends and family. That's stuff.
And we usually criticize when there's somebody around us. You know, we just don't criticize to ourselves, just in a mirror. I mean, there are only a few of us that discuss the bad things with the mirror.
You mentioned jigsaw puzzle. I suddenly had an image of a jigsaw puzzle with one tiny piece missing, and how frustrating and annoying. I mean, is that the work organisation? That one little piece can ruin it.
Yeah, and maybe as well, just a final thing to add, and I think touching on the culture element and sort of bringing it back to workplace and design and belonging. If we think about culture, there's kind of two key things that come to mind. The first is symbolism, which we touched on. So what is that symbol that we rally behind that might be the puzzle? It could be, you know, the physical Lego in our office, the colouring around us that's there. What is then that core symbolism? The second thing that then comes to mind is ritual. So how can we come together to have rituals or traditions as a company, as a group, as a culture, and thus how do our spaces enable us to do that? So whether that be, you know, the ritual of yoga on a Wednesday, or having coffee as a team in the shared coffee space, or different rituals we perform as an organisation. Two very interesting things to think about with space, I think the human identity, and then how do we really enable that and bring that to life through design?
Yeah, very good.
Can I just add something? That belonging doesn't mean you always agree. And that, for me, that's one of the big things that actually, and I think it was you when you did the research around, for us, Nigel, trusting someone doesn't mean you always agree with them. And I think that's when you have, otherwise you're creating a cult. I mean, that's it. When you can't question, you are creating a cult. And that is, I often say, whatever happened, why did no one speak up in Kodak when they invented digital photography? And everyone else, you know, somewhere in there was someone frightened to say, we should do something with this. And it's kind of scary.
Okay, we do have a question over there. Do we have a mic, though? We have all the mics. We're going to have to share mics. Baton.
Yes, hello, my name is Nigel Oseland. I'm coming from Velux company. A question for you, when you were just talking about belongings. Do you experience any relationship between belonging and the age of employee. I think these days, like, we have different generations, different ones, and we have a feeling that younger ones, they get more information, they have more experiences, and then they very easily go forward. So perhaps a little bit about this. Thank you.
Good question.
Maybe I start.
Yeah.
I would say I was also recently looking at one of the research. It was actually designed for 45 plus, how to deal with the workforce that is, let's say, older, especially in an age where 45 is actually not old. It's not like 5 years pre-retirement as it used to be. But nevertheless, it definitely showed that people that are older, so 40 plus, let's say, are more loyal. I mean, but this loyalty doesn't really mean belonging. We have to differ, I would say, this aspect. But when younger, I mean, it's only natural, of course, that you try to get experiences on different, in different workspaces also. And me as an employer, so to speak, or someone, that hires and deals with people, I would say it's also good this way, because if all the people that would come young in a company and not see anything else and just stay there as it used to be, then you close yourself for different perspectives that people with different perspectives can bring you into the company. And then once, of course, you get into this more mature age, then you settle down. But I would not say it really goes with the belonging. You can also have the people, the youngsters, that do belong, but they actually need to go out and see what are the other things. And maybe some of them, also in our case, are coming back, of course. You don't take all of them back. You take the ones back that you feel are part of the tribe, because not everybody's part of the tribe. We feel that. I mean, we feel that for ourselves as well. So I would say, from my experiences.
To add to that, I would say I don't see new generation entering being less belonging, but we as employers need to do a lot more to create their belonging, because it doesn't come automatically. We need to do a bigger effort. Otherwise, they will find another place to work. So what we thought maybe were naturally just alone with our name, wow, they will just come. Maybe they'll even work for free. Now now we need to do a much more, and they are much more critical. It's a generation that is much more critical and asking more questions and do not just accept things. So I think it's super positive. I actually enjoy that dialogue, but we need to do a big effort.
But so we're touching on the kind of the group thing. If we're all the same kind of people in the same organization, we've all been there for 20, 30 years, that's not too good for innovation. You do need fresh blood, and you need people with different perspectives. So another theme that came through today was everyone's different. Mark, you mentioned we've got some underlying drivers, values, but pretty much there's lots of variation. We're all individuals. We should embrace that individuality and diversity, whether that's neurodiversity, culture, age, gender, and so on. But the big question is, and all those differences, we communicate different, and we have different workplace requirements. So how in the modern workplace can we design and still embrace all that individuality and diversity?
So you'll never get it 100% right, and I think you have to start from that premise. The whole idea of being totally inclusive, it will never happen. You will always have the extremes. Boring product thing, but we do a chair, and we can only ever guarantee our chairs meeting like up to the 96th percentile. Yeah. There will always be people in it. So you start from that premise. But the thing that we continually go back to is you no longer design for people, you design with people, and design is an ongoing process. Because you talk about different types, but if I've had a row with my wife, The day I come to office, I'm different than I was the day
Yeah,
before.
yeah, of course.
So we are all, or you've just taken a bad phone call, you've just lost a close relative, all those kind of things. So it's not as if it's personality or those traits are static.
Yeah.
So it's not just, we're talking about a lot more about, where the design includes as many as universal design.
Yeah.
Universal design, I don't know if any have heard of OXO Good Grips. So OXO Good Grips, the guy designed a vegetable peeler for his wife who had arthritis. But I bet they are the most beautiful design things, and everyone buys them, not realizing they were designed actually for someone with dexterity problems. That is where you go, is actually the more universal and inclusive, and measure and monitor, because what worked today might not work tomorrow.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah.
And any other comments?
Yeah, and I think to build on that, and so for me, diversity, equity, inclusion is something that I'm profoundly passionate about, and I actually do a lot of this non-for-profit in the Netherlands. The work we do, and I think also where it often begins, is education. And I also really enjoyed that you brought up age and age diversity. I truly believe, and I think something we're seeing now, is yes, we're really focusing with workforces in terms of bringing in Gen Z, sort of catering for millennials, but actually we have a really talented, experienced older workforce as well that may not necessarily want to move into retirement yet, but are we also creating a flexible work environment and the right space for those individuals? And are we thinking about, what does that mean in terms of how we structure their workday? How do we bring flexibility into that? And I think we're really losing a huge sort of proportion of talents in that other end. And I think particularly if I say with older women as well, or maybe women who want to re-enter the workforce later on, which is very important. I think really simply, and sort of wearing more my change management hat, less of my design hat, for me it really fundamentally comes down to education and how do we really help people to be aware of their unconscious biases. So maybe what are these held beliefs or feelings or thoughts that we may have that we might not even necessarily be so aware of in our prefrontal cortex, so in the front of our brain, but maybe that is influencing our decisions and how we do things and how we bring things. So it starts sort of with that education, and then I think to build on Mark's point earlier, when we are then solving problems, when we're going through design, how are we really having a diverse group of people around the table? And that's everything from age, gender, nationality, but I think also increasingly neurodiversity as well. Very important. And I think increasingly, how do we design space for different sort of neurodivergent individuals as well?
How does that translate to the manufacturing side?
On neurodiversity or in generally on inclusivity, yeah, that's it's a big discussion how you actually do that. You need to be much more flexible with your working times because some of the neurodiverse needs I can only work 6 hours, stuff like that. So I think manufacturing have a harder time on finding that. However, many manufacturing company has program where they try to adopt different functions in their factory for people with special needs. Of course, a service dock is not really possible on the factory floor, but there could be other functions where we are doing similar things. But for sure, it's a bigger challenge in manufacturing.
Yeah, but what you mentioned there, though, the flexibility over time.
Yeah, time.
That's a great way of embracing.
As an example, now we the shift model we have. When you work in a factory, you need to be there when the shift starts. And you need to be. With it, for example, if what we call families with minor children, then they can have a special shift model where those years where that. But then there comes all the in especially those countries where there's unions. Then you start to offer something for someone, and then that discussion starts. So it's super difficult on the manufacturing floor.
Yeah, maybe I would add it's of course inclusion and everything. We are talking about this a lot. We also have it in our code of conduct. Of course, definitely inclusion. We have a lot of foreigner workers in the company. But then on the other hand, also speaking about the Gen Z and Y and so on and different needs, and we need to adapt to that. Of course we do, but on the other hand, also those generations have to adapt to what the rules are. So it's not that we have to accept everything, and this is not a home environment where maybe the parents are the happiness managers of those kids, you know, we are actually not. And I'm also with my kids referring to, it's exactly like in the traffic, for example, there are rules. No matter who, are you black, white, I don't know, whatever difficulties you have, unless you respect the rules that are there, you cannot be there. You cannot have a driving license if you don't respect that. And it's the same also in the companies. Of course, yes, we need to, as companies, transform, adapt to the different values that are developing. I mean, the companies are not the same as they were 100 years ago. But still not necessarily taking everything in. Yes, maybe listening, being empathic, but still these are the rules. This is our company. If you don't fit, like we said, if we are not your tribe, maybe some other company is your tribe. And it's also okay to say thank you and goodbye.
Okay. Any questions? Because I've got a question I'm not sure I should ask, so I'd like someone to save me and ask a question instead. So, okay, I'll ask
seem to be so worried.
yeah. Yes. So, Mark mentioned I've done a lot of research on personality differences and how we design for different personality types who also communicate differently. But there's quite a bit of research out there that suggests that really strong leaders, people who force their way through the ranks, have a very particular personality types, basically secondary sociopaths.
Depends on the organisation.
And yet, are they not the ones dictating what the rest of the workplace should be?
Yeah. So about 23 years ago, British Airways did a fantastic new headquarters in the UK, and it was the first all open plan office. The thing is, some people were more open plan than others. And Bob Ayling at the time was that, and when his office was open plan, but you could have got 40 people in an office where it had 4 people. And so that whole thing, that then cascaded. Everything else they did suddenly doesn't work. And this is the problem. I think the other thing that a good leader who is like that recognizes, you then get a leader that's your balance.
Okay.
And that is, if you look at a lot of leading architecture firms, you'll usually find the creative one and then the realistic one. That whole, like, you know, the kind of, hang on, do you know, yeah, you're laughing, because it is, that's that, and that, so often what you find is a good board of directors is not all those kind of people. Someone's holding it
and
back.
you got the finance guy looking after the numbers. Hopefully HR are coming in to have a little bit more care.
Yeah, you don't want the finance by being too creative.
But I guess the board is there to prevent a toxic environment being created by a particular leadership style. Did you want to add anything to that, Jesper?
No, I just thought that isn't the modern leader about integrity? And I know there's this psychopath thing that we say. I think it's also a popular theme to mention, right? But somehow isn't that a dying breed? You know, I think it's difficult to keep being that one, and at least if you want, you need to have a mega strong brand if you need to survive, my thinking is.
But that's interesting because obviously it does link to the brand, and brands are changing. Obviously, there's reliability and trust and all that, but there's a softer side to brand coming in, isn't there, as well, the inclusive. So maybe there is you said they're a dying breed, these leaders, but maybe that's because of, again, back to generations coming through a different. They're looking for something different in their brand and the organizations they support.
Yeah, and I think there's an openness to so many organizations today with compliance lines and all kind of things where it's difficult to, you know, I don't know any company that do not have an anti-bullying policy, right? A lot of things is much more open than just a few years ago where, you know, that was just below the carpet. We didn't talk about that, but you know,
Yeah,
I think
we had whistleblowers.
whistleblowers, right? And so and so there's a lot of things much more open where if you disagree, you know, I think that requirement leaders being more decent is actually never been higher.
Yep.
And you cannot go around being that bloke that you just, you know, we've probably all experienced that leader in our career that what an idiot. But those guys, I think, maybe I'm naive, I think they're a dying breed.
And I want to build on this, and I think it's such an interesting topic, and I think there is no harder job right now than being a very visible leader of a well-known brand. And I would argue, and something again with the change element, if I look at the leaders that I work with at Philips, at Booking, at a lot of these large organizations, I talk about this concept which is accessible leadership. And what I mean by that is, if we go on social media, if I want to DM Kim Kardashian, I can do that. Then why am I not going to go into an organization and I don't like something? I'm going to email that leader. I'm going to chat them on Teams. I want to know about it. And I think particularly for a lot of other leaders, the job historically was, I want to sit in my private office and I want to make decisions and I'm going to be shielded by secrecy. I think the reality is people very much want to see those leaders and they want to interact with them. They want them to be accessible. They want to have that dialogue. And it's how do you do that at scale? And also how do you do that with very sort of diverse environments in your organization, but also outside of. So every single leader we work with at Philips, pretty much VP level and above, is all media trained, because we know that most likely they will also be in the public spectrum, whether it be on the news, on LinkedIn, etc., where they also really need to project our brand appropriately and put that out there. And I think the interesting thing is, it's so easy often for us to criticize leaders, and we're always looking for that moment of whereby they're not there. But it really, I think a modern leader, it takes a lot. It's challenging. And I think sometimes we also forget that they are also people as well. And maybe what is the system around them? So the performance management, the processes, the different elements around them that are maybe triggering and driving that behavior, versus is it actually the individual themselves? So I think, again, that human empathy.
Yeah, definitely.
And there are some, the trouble with leaders of large organizations, their whole career can be judged on a 1 minute soundbite. That they may have said something and it's taken completely out of context. I could say something in this conference and it, you know, might be a bit controversial, doesn't, you know, but they'll say it and suddenly it goes viral, and that's a huge responsibility, which is why the media training is important.
Yeah. Let's hope I'm not reported as saying all leaders are psychopaths.
Yeah.
That'd be the end of my career, wouldn't it? Any questions? Or I'll keep going. So we brought up sustainability. Katie's gone, isn't she? But I mentioned that fact about, I'm doing some research at the moment, so on average, offices use about 30% of the week, so that's a lot of wasted space that's being heated and cooled and serviced. And my answer to that has always been, let's go down the activity-based working and introduce desk sharing and allocated desking, get our utilization up. That's the route. But then I did this piece of research for Mark, and he mentioned it earlier, where one of the things we found is that people who have allocated desks are more likely to come to the office. So how do I mean, my whole career has been built on implementing agile working, so how do I now reconcile this fact? And I think it is to do, I mean, it's not 100%. I think it is to do with, again, recognizing individual preferences and being aware of those. But I'd be interested in your comments to help me out on this one.
I don't know. I could go first. I think it's a good business case doing that desk ratio. We know that, so we utilize our billing. That's why we create all the stuff around. So that could either be, you know, what we're doing, fitness center, baristas, other areas where people, because I completely agree that what you have your own desk, that is your area, and we like that. But that's why we want to create all the other stuff. So that's actually much better. So, and I don't think everyone should go and do fitness centers, but there could be other things that locally is for the relevant companies to do, shared places where people actually enjoy hanging out, because that's pulling people back.
Okay.
So I'm seeing the return of neighborhoods again,
Yeah.
which we talked about this 10 years ago, and it kind of disappeared. But now neighborhoods are where I might not have my own desk, but we all own an area. And so that if I go in, and my best mate Nigel's going to be somewhere nearby, you know, and I think that is, and it gives you a sense of security. The other challenge of, you know, desk booking is that at least when I get in, I know where I'm going to be going. For some people, the uncertainty is just overwhelming. So, you know, I think, but neighborhoods are starting to make a return. But planning those neighborhoods is not easy. I always talk about bleeding neighborhoods. In other words, neighborhoods where if this neighborhood's full, you can just go into the, and put in those neighborhoods next to each other, the right ones. That's very careful planning as well.
I mean, in our culture, it's not possible.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. I think we've done quite a lot already. We do have up here the so-called hosting area, for example, when people are coming from our companies abroad, so they have their own spaces in the time when they are here. But imagining that not having their own spaces, I think this would be a revolution in this culture and in this company, which is rather very traditional, as I've said. So. Yeah. Own office or a few people in an office, but then with closed doors and so on is still something. That's why we do have a lot of glasses. So we try to break some of the silences that are here, especially in the old building with this very long hall and all the offices being then on one side of it, you know. It's not far away, but still when you go into the office, close the door. It's a neighborhood in there, yeah. But maybe once in the future. But we do have a lot of places where you can go, like with colleagues. But it's still, we are not there yet as a culture. Yeah. But it's there. Like I said, I believe the transformation can be also triggered and empowered by a carefully designed environment. But change doesn't happen overnight.
No, but I think it's a good place to finish though, because what we've seen today is that variation, and it all starts, doesn't it, with a good change process, good design briefing. It's about understanding the culture and the leadership style and the people within the organization, and then what comes out of that is hopefully a design that which will meet their needs, but maybe just push them a little bit as well. We need to challenge and we need to push people in a direction, but I think we have to understand cultures is the starting point. I'm going to call the panel discussion to a close there. Can you please give them a big round of applause? Thanks, guys.